This hangout on air is live. Hey, I'm rolling, I guess. Man, YouTube just changed once again their formatting procedure, everything, trying to get this rolling. Way too complicated, but I won't go into all that. So welcome to another Tuesday at 12:15 live stream with the KetoND, Dr. G. And today we'll be covering some topics I hope you'll enjoy. And we'll probably spend about 20 minutes here. And yeah, so I recently posted a short video touching on fish oil and protein. And I'm going to pick this up, going into some of those topics just a little bit further. And first item, as I put in the title, I wanted to talk about the discrepancies in terms of nutritional advice when it comes to fueling the athlete. And I've been on this topic lately. And so let me catch you up to speed if you're not familiar with that. But, you know, carb loading, that goes back to the 90s and way back. I mean, in my time when I started to get into cycling and exercising, of course, you know, there was the loading up the carbs the night before you're going to work out or do a big ride or a big event. And here we have 30 years later, and we're still doing the same kind of routine. So if you look at the top athletes and the top cycling teams, for instance, look at the nutritional cuisine of the one of the Tour de France cycling teams, for instance. You're gonna see that same paradigm in terms of feeding the athlete the carbohydrates as quick energy to get those to burn. And as I began to explore with a recent video when I discussed this topic and as it pertains to the low carb diet and the ketogenic diet, how do we pair those up? You know, why do we always have these controversies around nutrition? Well, I won't go into all the reasons for that. I mean, it's sort of like talking about politics and religion, I suppose, is the nutritional science. Really, a lot of what's advice is given and used in terms of applying nutrition is not really based as much on science as much as it's based on our individual sort of perceptions and the things that we hold sacred, the things that we have learned, and especially the way we've been raised and the things we've eaten. So whether it's how we're taught in terms of, the philosophy of life and eating we hold that near and dear to our hearts. And so there is a strong emotional connection to holding on to what we are doing and want to do. Also, frankly, we have a food supply that promotes addictive like behaviors. And I don't want to over exaggerate that point, but our bodies are designed to treat in other words, every time we eat, we hit certain pleasure centers in the brain, for instance, and things that we like that taste good. I mean, what does that mean? I like this food. Well, you like that because it's hitting the receptors in your mouth, hitting brain centers that hit the pleasure centers, and we have either fond memories or it's the pleasure stimuli to the nervous system, and therefore it makes us feel good. Now, those pathways were designed and we're given those to allow us to sort of direct our own well-being. And so just like we fall and hurt ourselves, and therefore we try to avoid falling, when we eat a certain way, and it tends to generate more of a positive outcome in terms of how we feel, we're going to go that direction. Now, that's been sort of distorted with the advent of chemistry in terms of the food supply and how we raise and manufacture foods. And so companies are very good at, basically it revolves around the physiologic response to carbohydrates and sugars. Those particular foods hit certain centers in the brain. So let me come back to the athlete. And so when we talk about the controversies, it's just kind of good to recognize that as both professionals and experts and athletes, and then us as individuals, how we approach this topic is largely based on some of our habits, our emotional connections to food, and the things we think are real. We need to have something to hold us grounded and to give us a direction. And so with science and the studies, there's a number of flaws that I pointed out prior, so I won't rehash all that. But let me just summarize it by saying this. Evidence is very good and very clear that you can fuel an athlete with carbohydrates. It makes sense. We use carbohydrates to make energy. Our bodies are designed to do that, and we do that very efficiently. And this works very well. You know, a lot of, if not most of the top athletes are using carbohydrates in a more high fat, you know, they use carbohydrates predominantly to fuel athletic performance. So, so how do we pair that up with the ketogenic diet and the low carb mantra or philosophy, I should say? Well, as I pointed out last time, this is an emerging topic in that science is not really caught up to the degree that we have for the studies that were done on carbohydrates. The other thing to remember is it's a much more complex picture in terms of the ideal diet for a given individual to do a particular activity, physical endeavor. And so it depends on the person's age, their sex, their genetics, the type of sport they're trying to do, and their individual metabolism and adaptations. So if you take a group of athletes who are in their 20s and they are primarily carb adapted because they've been using carbs their entire life in dominance, doing studies with them will have a different outcome than if you took a group of athletes who are, say, in their 40s and 50s and you keto adapt them, for instance, and then look at the different fuel sources. And so it's really hard for us to come away with a clear, this is absolutely correct, or that's right, or this is right. And as I've recently begun to discuss this, what I'm pushing back against is the information and the posts, the videos, the supposed experts who are talking about the carb high diets is the ideal diet still for athletes, and they're dismissing the low carb idea and that the ketogenic diet is a good way to fuel an athlete. And I think they're wrong. I think that's, you know, I'm not saying let's not use carbohydrates. Let's use the best of both worlds. Our bodies are designed to use both forms of energy. What do we know now, and how can we strategize to use it to our benefit? And so this idea of the targeted keto diet is what I think makes the most sense, and from what we currently know. And just through my own individual experience, I can speak to this. And this is the idea of, I think, really using what we know about human metabolism to our advantage. And it's that we're using both the ketogenic diet and we're using targeted carbohydrate consumption to get the best. Those studies are yet to come out in sufficiency to really begin to see what is the ideal. But again, just to point out is that you have to be very careful with interpreting research. I recently was reviewing a study that was on how fat was very bad for you in terms of promoting leaky gut and inflammation, and on and on and on it went. And it was a review article, and that it looked at the microbiome in terms of how does fat affect the gut bacteria. The reason I point out this study is because it's a good example of people taking not just the original research, but this is a review article. So we're taking a study that basically was studying other studies and then pooled, they kind of consolidated their conclusions and therefore came to, you know, what they thought was true about high fat diet, for instance. When you actually look at the studies they were going off of, though, you learn a few things. They were, for one, it was on animals. They were also using unhealthy carbohydrate in the model of eating an unhealthy diet and then adding in these fats. So if you have a very pro-inflammatory, poor nutritionally set up diet, you know, lots of refined carbohydrates, too much sugar, and cheap. They also didn't regulate or control for the types of fats they were given. So if you give lots of polyunsaturated fats or pro-inflammatory fats, and then you try to draw a conclusion about a high-fat diet, you know, that's just it is not, the studies do not support those conclusions. And we clearly see in the context of a healthy diet, using high fat is a very healthy and anti-inflammatory process. And so, and we see improvements in the microbiome, by the way. So that study, although useful, it does not mean that the high fat diet is something to be thrown out and avoided. So let's see. Targeted ketogenic diet. By the way, also, as I mentioned previously, when you talk about fueling the athlete, most studies are on young people. They are in 20-year-olds. What I'd like to speak to just briefly is how do we determine what's best for someone that's older? Because as I said, age dependent. You know, our diet that works really well in a 25-year-old may not work in a 55-year-old, or not be ideal. And there's also, I guess, two different goals here. One is, are we trying to just win races in this season at age 22 or 25, or are we trying to promote longevity and good health? And so, and I'm not saying let's not be as competitive as we can, but I'm speaking to the athletic community right now. There is sometimes a drive to succeed no matter what the cost. And I mean, if that's your goal, go get them. But I mean, what came to mind as I was thinking about this was the Lance Armstrong story. So that should be common knowledge now. But I see that the exercise and the competitive sports community still drives this sort of win at any cost. And the costs I'm talking about are what are the damaging effects of the body that people are engaging in. So it may be legal to carb load, but is it that much different from what Lance Armstrong was doing? And I'm talking, it's a different level, but obviously they were breaking the rules. We're talking about using hormones and, you know, the blood doping and all this stuff to maximize output. But I mean, really the goal, they're after the same things. And I would argue that the health, the damaging effects of winning at all costs is not worth it, you know. And again, I'm now talking to the older adult, where maybe as I am, I'm very interested in competing and beating other guys and people on the cycling field there, being a competitive cyclist. But I'm also not willing to damage my body. And so I believe that the idea of using carbohydrates fueling the engine, no matter what quality of source we're using, especially refined starches and carbohydrates that are devoid of the micronutrients that we need, is very harmful long-term. And instead, so targeted ketogenic diet, and there's two important points and aspects of this, and I'll wrap up this topic. One, you need to keto adapt over a series of many weeks. And so if you want to, and this is regardless of being a diet, of being an athletic piece of advice, this is for adults and anyone wishing to optimize their health. I mean, gee, what's the side effects of lowering your carbohydrate intake and eating healthy fats? Well, let's go down the list. Anti-inflammatory, improves hormone status, you burn fat, you maintain and build lean muscle quite easily and remarkably, actually. You improve mental cognition and neurological function. You know, most, if not all, of the chronic degenerative diseases that are associated with inflammation and all those problems, we see decreased markers for those. And so if I come in 10th in a race and I get all those gains versus doing something that could make me 3rd or 4th, I will take that trade-off. So I realize that's sometimes different goals for different people. Now, with all that said, though, the good news is that I can adapt to a low-carb diet and still be competitive, if not more competitive. So whether it's you're trying to get ahead in work, you want to be sharper for your kids to help them with their homework, you don't want to be tired all the time, you want to sleep better. And this translates into better performance in terms of having fun and getting out there. Whether you're competitive or not, you're going to go do a run like Bloomsday here in our, that's coming up with that race, or whatever you want to do. Low carbohydrate adaptation to effectively use fats as energy is a very worthwhile endeavor. So you need at least 3, 4, 5, maybe even 6 weeks. So as an athlete, if you are looking to to delve into this, I would highly recommend you set up and get going with a healthy low carb diet, those healthy fats, and get that rolling, because you can't just start doing and using this type of diet, a week or two before you're going to be competing. Having done this now for over 3 years, I can speak to the benefits in terms of my ability to train better and to then perform better when it comes to races. Now, what's different about this season is that I have a better understanding about this targeted ketogenic diet. And so after these weeks of adapting to a high-fat diet, targeted means that we are essentially carb loading at very strategic times. And now the types of carbs and the amounts are still at a much lower degree than what we would traditionally use as carb loading. So for instance, we'll talk about an example. So let's say I have a race this Wednesday, which coincidentally in a couple of months I will be having races on Wednesdays. So what I would begin to do is, along with my cycling training, is that I would be shifting my diet to increase my carbohydrates at 2 times. Now, this is just for me, but it would probably work for most people. That would be a little more at night, so around dinner time or that last meal of the evening. And what I'm talking about is a small serving of maybe some berries, maybe a half of a yam or sweet potato, along with some other foods. And then pre-race, and say an hour or two before, I would also get some of those carbohydrates in. So probably a couple hours before, those complex carbohydrates. Again, smaller servings. What I wouldn't be having is, sports drinks that are sweetened with sugar, or the gels that are more refined carbohydrates. Now, closer to the individual start of the race, I would probably add in, maybe 10 grams of something like dextrose, tapioca dextrin type supplements. So some of those gels I'm not totally opposed to, as long as they're not simple sugars, but they've got those longer chain carbohydrates. Dextrose molecules essentially is chains of glucose. And perhaps things like, a serving of rice, a few hours before. And small, we're not talking about a plate of pasta and bread and things like that. So, and then of course the functional fats like MCT, a little bit of coconut oil, but I like to use MCT oil because that's pretty easily digested, and also those exogenous ketones, along with my electrolytes and stuff. So my pre-race drink is going to have just a tad of those carbohydrates I talked about. And this might be in a bar form, for instance, or foods, but also MCT powder, electrolytes, and again, without the refined sugar. I usually also do a few things that help with some of the respiratory pathways, like N-acetylcysteine. So I have some botanicals like lobelia and licorice root that I like to do for better respiration. A lot of supports all throughout my training season and going in and out of races is to do a lot of antioxidants, because you generate tons of free radicals competing and giving yourself that kind of intensity. So I'll put some links probably in the comments below the video about this in a little more detail, talk about this. So targeted keto diet. So this is not carb loading for a week. This is literally like you're just slipping those in your meals. Let's see. Yeah, and so just to be clear, again, as you get older, I think we become less carbohydrate tolerant. And so the performance in older adults, I think you'll be much better off to adapt to a lower carbohydrate diet. See, I already covered that. Fat research. Just looking at my, protein. So let me, excuse me, I mentioned the new protein in my prior video. That's a mushroom protein that I'm kind of excited about. And let me show you that. Let's see, I've got to get that up. Bear with me 1 second. Get in here and do screen share. Application window. There we go. There we go. I think you might be able to see this here now. All right, so there it is. This is MycoPure by Designs for Health. And I realize in the screen there, you might not be able to see all this. Make that a little bit bigger. So why am I excited about this? Well, I've done videos on collagen protein. I've done videos on the problems with milk proteins like whey protein. The bottom line with protein replacement in terms of diet both and supplements is that we need to have variety. Protein is made up of building blocks called amino acids. And those amino acids come into the body and they get converted and reconnected to build protein again. So this is everything from building muscle to regenerating other essential protein carriers in the bloodstream and immune system products, and all of the cell metabolism products that are produced are often these various chains of amino acids. So they have both structural and functional roles in the body. But bottom line is that it's an important and what we call as essential amino acids that we get from protein are vital for health. And the types of amino acids you get from different proteins will vary depending on what that is. So for instance, a steak versus eggs versus beans or nuts will provide different amino acid profiles. And what we know is that to get a complete amino acid profile, we need a variety of foods. Meats are fairly complete. Things like rice protein are not very complete. Plant sources of protein generally are more incomplete, and so the variety is more important. I have a high regard for pea protein, but there are people out there with some allergies to it, and so we've been looking for some alternatives. MycoPure, so myco, that comes from the word mycel, or these are fungus. And in this case, it's mushrooms. So we've got fermented shiitake mushroom protein plus amino assist. So what does that all mean? Let's just do a close-up really quick on the ingredients. So essentially what they've done is they're taking shiitake mushrooms and they've taken the protein out of it. We know that mushrooms are very good sources of protein. And not only that, by the way, they're very complete sources of protein. They have all of the branched chain amino acids and the 9 essential amino acids that we need in our bodies. I'll talk about branched chain aminos in a second. But the other thing they've done is blended other mushroom extracts. We've got agaricus, trametes, scanoderma, grifola, and lentinula, and cordyceps. That is like a who's who of the best nutritional and medicinal mushrooms that we know. These have immune enhancing effects. They provide certain factors that help your immune system fight off infection, ward off cancer, and rebuild the body. They also have an adaptogenic effect in terms of supporting the adrenal and hormone systems. And so this is kind of a win-win. I mean, we've got, what do they give us? 20 grams of protein per serving. And I'll point out this carbohydrate intake, or the amount here, 10 grams. So this has a 10-gram amount of carbohydrate. Now that sounds high, except when you realize that that's the complex carbohydrate coming from these immune factors. So these are not carbohydrates that are converted to sugar. Most of that is not. You know, this is these immune enhancing carbohydrates that you get from mushrooms, similar to what we find in things like echinacea root and the larix tree, the arabinogalactan. These are complex carbohydrates that are not, it's almost like we need a new term for them. I'd call them immune enhancing carbohydrates. So they are not the sugar promoting carbohydrates. So it's important to note just that distinction when you look at this label. Of course, they don't add sugar to flavor this, which is even better. So super excited about this protein. I actually did sample it. I've been trying this myself. It's the chocolate, and it's great, excellent. No problem. Put it in water. It tastes great. Probably be good in coconut milk or something as well. So incorporated it into your shake. Now, I should point out from my discussion a moment ago about sort of the targeted keto diet and pre-race protocol, protein supplementation should be more of a post-race. That's been long sort of known knowledge in exercise recovery. So I find two main times that I think is best for protein. One is you can have protein throughout your day, and even a little bit pre-race, that 2-hour meal before. A little bit of protein is very helpful. But for recovery, post-workout and post-race, you want to get, those 10 to 20 grams of proteins, very absorbable source. Also, the other time it's really important is getting some of these good proteins before bed. I really like supplementing with collagen protein before bed because that's when we're most active rebuilding joints, muscles, and nervous system, etc. Anyway, so let's see. That is a great product. Now, branched chain aminos, I'll just quickly kind of run through those. Those are often touted for athletes as being really, really helpful. These are specific amino acids that, again, come from proteins that have some very specific roles in the body that do everything from helping muscle rebuild. They help as immune signalers and cellular signals really, and they're involved with the immune system and other metabolic activities. So I won't read through all these. Good old Wikipedia kind of gives us a good summary about those branched chain aminos. Now I point them out as well because you can pick protein sources that are higher, like the MycoPure protein. You can also supplement with branched chain aminos separately in a powder, which I do as well. So they are, by the way, that's leucine, isoleucine, and valine. And the branched chain just has to do with what the molecule looks like, has a branched chain hanging off of it. And so anyway, great for recovery. It's also great for improving muscle activity. And it improves the metabolism of glucose, by the way, so improved energy. One thing that I had forgotten and realized here as well was that it also helps with fat metabolism. So really enhancing both energy sources in terms of utilizing glucose and fats as energy. And that's really important for athletes. Again, we want to use both glucose and fats efficiently. So. All right, so back to stop screen share here, come back to the front camera. So probably call that a wrap for now. I guess I'll lastly close with this comment that if you are struggling with change, and this is my personal view and my journey has helped me realize that in order for you to change and stick with something consistently, you have to have a reason why you're doing that. If you rely on your body just to make you these instinctive decisions for you, you're going to default to the path of least resistance, and it's often going to be a path to worse health. And so what is it? The second law of thermodynamics, that all things are moving towards a state from order to disorder. And in terms of our human physiology, left to our own natural devices, we are heading towards more chaos and disorganization and poor health unless we invest our intellect and our heart and soul into a plan. And so that was a long way of saying you need a goal, and then you need to make a plan to get to that goal. And it needs to be something, start with little things. I mean, again, for me, I get excited this time of year because the snow's melting and there are races coming up and there's friends to hang out with in terms of physical activities that I get to do and I enjoy. And so we have a cycling team. It's exciting to be a part of that, and I'll put some links down below about that. But find something you enjoy that is invigorating, gets you out, whether it's a cycling club, whether it's a hiking group that you meet up with. It's something that you can do that's active, and then set a goal around that. And that's where racing, not everybody needs to be competitive, but doing a fun run or a walk, anything, just set it on, you sign up for it, put it on your calendar, and set a few of those up and goals over the years or over the course of the upcoming year. Keep it something simple and achievable. If you are wanting a little more of a challenge, then by all means, aim high. But for me, that's the 24-hour mountain bike race Memorial Day weekend. So that is what is on my calendar, among other things coming up. So I'll call that a wrap for now. I can only talk for so long, and that was a little bit longer than just a short update here on the live stream. And if you have questions, of course, do put those down below, and let me know any questions or comments, and we'll follow this up with future broadcasts. So if all goes well, by next Tuesday, we'll do the same thing here. So again, thanks for watching.